Welcome to an examination of justice. What does it mean? I'm going to do some reading and some thinking and some talking and some explaining, and when I'm done, it's going to look a little bit like this, and there will be some big areas for you to fill in with your own writing, because this piece of writing here gets right to the core of what it's all about. So you're going to be reading and annotating along with me, and then creating some of your own thinking on this paper, getting ready for discussion later about the concept of justice. One of the first things you want to think about when you read a piece of writing is who wrote it and why did they write it. So this piece of writing, always, and if things are not attached to people's names, be suspicious, because something on the internet is never going to be as valuable. Well, it's just who wrote it, why did they write it. So in this case, we've got who, Mr. Thomas Nagel, and why did he write it? Well, it's a chapter in this book that he wrote called What Does It All Mean? Mr. Thomas Nagel is a philosopher. So he's not a politician. He's not a YouTuber. He's not trying to sell anything other than an understanding of what this concept of justice means. Philosophers, what they do for a job is they ask questions and try to find answers. And the questions they try to ask are things like, what is right? How should we act, like as people? So I'm going to write these down right here because, and philosophers are very careful with their language, very careful, because they're trying to prove certain things. So let's get right into this first paragraph here, which I'm going to highlight the whole thing because it kind of gets at the very root of, well, I think it's probably one of the most important questions that we could really ask ourselves. Religion asks this question, and politics asks this question, and in fact, it's probably the most popular question to disagree about in the realm of questions. So the question is it unfair that some people are born rich and some are born poor? If it's unfair, should anything be done about it? So the first thing you might want to do in your annotations, you might want to answer that question. Yes, no, I don't know, I'm not sure, everything, nothing. You could put your little quick answer right in a box or a little cloud right there. I did want to mention, by the way, though, since we've got it right here, and I've already started to draw a line up here, that this question, in the United States, we have a government that is sometimes under the control of a party, the Democrats. Sometimes it's under the control of a party known as the Republicans. And how they answer this question is very different. But it is possible to say this about Democrats. Well, they want what's good for America. And it's also possible to say this of Republicans. Well, they want what's good for America. But philosophically, the two parties disagree very strongly about this question and how it should be answered. So, part of their disagreement is something I want you to talk about and to think about. Not be afraid in developing your own answer. Question is this: why are some people poor? What is the reason? It's a very complicated thing to think about, so I've given you a lot of space, and you might say, well, some are poor for this reason, others are poor for that reason. You might not be sure about some things, but I do want you to jot your own answer down right here. So you could go ahead and pause the video and write an answer right in this space right here. Write your answer right in this space here. I'm going to read. The world is full of inequalities. Inequalities is when things are not equal. So an inequality, if you have some people are very wealthy and some are very poor, inequality. Inequality is itself a neutral statement. It's not saying why. It's not saying that it's bad. It's just saying that there is not an equality. Things are not equal. The world is full of inequalities within countries and from one country to another. Some children are born into comfortable, prosperous. Prosperous is another word for wealthy and productive. Wealthy, productive, everybody has a job, things are taken care of, prosperous homes, and grow up well-fed and well-educated. Others are born poor, don't get enough to eat, and never have access to much education or medical care. Clearly, this is a matter of luck. We are not responsible for the social or economic class or country into which we are born. So the important phrase here is into which we are born. Babies. If you're born a baby into a household that is chaotic and desperate, well, you didn't invent that situation. That is the situation into which you were born. And I've always say this to people when they talk about families and the struggles that come with families is we don't choose our families of birth or adoption. When we're babies, we don't choose. When you're older, you might choose your family, choose to build a family. We don't choose our families or our countries. If you're born in a country that doesn't have rights and responsibilities, or a country where the people are not treated fairly by their government, that was not your choice if you were born there. Or, this one's always interesting, when we were born. Just imagine how different your life would be if you were born 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We don't choose our families, our countries, or when we were born. And yet, our families shape us in so many different ways. And so, I would like you, in this space, about this big, to answer this question. How was I shaped by my family? And if you're younger than me, you're probably still being shaped, and you might not know. Both of my parents were teachers. That's how I was shaped by my family. Both of my parents were teachers. Now I'm a teacher, but I didn't know that when I was a teenager, that things would turn out like that. More reading. The question is, how bad are inequalities which are not the fault of the people who suffer from them? Should governments use their power, and this gets to this question right here, should governments use their power to try to reduce inequalities of this kind for which the victims are not responsible? Some inequalities are deliberately imposed. Racial discrimination, for example, deliberately excludes. So exclude means leaves people out, or tells people they cannot, tells people they are on the outside. So if you're excluded, you're not allowed. Racial discrimination, for example, deliberately excludes people of one race from jobs, housing, and education which are available to people of another race. Notice this statement is not saying that this happens at any particular place. It is just describing what racial discrimination is. So my question for you is, in your life, in what you believe you have seen, in the way that you understand the world working, how big of a deal is this? I'm going to write that. How big of a deal? How big of a problem is racial discrimination in 2019? You can go ahead and write your answer to that question. Big space for that, because it's a big question. And if you could, with whatever your answer is here, back it up with some examples. That could be stories from the news, things that you heard about, things that you believe about, or they could be stories from your own life, little things that you could say, well, I actually saw this happen. I know this happens. I saw this. Or women, this is a different kind of discrimination, may be kept out of jobs or denied privileges available only to men. This is not merely a matter of bad luck. Remember, we talked about the babies born into rich or poor families. That's kind of just luck. It just is what it is. This is something different. This is not merely a matter of bad luck. Racial and sexual discrimination are clearly unfair. They are forms of inequality caused by factors that should not be allowed to influence people's basic welfare. Fairness requires that opportunities should be open to those who are qualified, and it is clearly a good thing when governments try to enforce such equality of opportunity. But it is harder to know what to say about inequalities that arise in the ordinary course of events. So this is very carefully organized. If you look at each paragraph, you know he's talking about different kinds of inequalities. So that's one thing that is a characteristic of sophisticated text, is that organization is really important, and organization is very carefully designed because ideas are complicated. It is harder to know what to say about inequalities that arise in the ordinary course of events without deliberate racial or sexual discrimination, because even if there is equality of opportunity, and any qualified person can go to a university or get a job or buy a house or run for office, regardless of race, religion, sex, or national origin, there will still be plenty of inequalities left. Now remember that when this philosopher is using that phrase inequality, that word inequality, he's using it neutrally. He's not saying that an inequality is necessarily bad. He's just saying that it is the way that things are. People, so even with equal opportunity, even with equal opportunity, you'll still have inequalities. And he's also saying, is that bad? So he's asking the question. He's not telling you that it's bad. He's saying, is that a bad thing? And if so, should something be done about it? It goes back to that first sentence that he's always thinking about. If it's unfair, if it's not right, should anything be done about it? And I'm going to give that question to you right now. This question, I want it to pertain to this one, which is really about this paragraph right here. These inequalities, he's saying, are bad because it's not fair and it's not right. If someone, for only some characteristic, racial, their their gender, or whatever, that's discrimination, and that's bad. So in this case, this leads to this, but the question I want you to answer is, what should be done about it? I think, even in a system of equality of opportunity, some people will have a head start and will end up with a greater benefits than others whose native talents are the same. Saying this like it's a fact. Not only that, but differences in native talent will produce big differences in the resulting benefits in a competitive system. So he's doing a lot of explaining. And I think that we'll stop right here for this volume, because it's been about 15 minutes, and we'll dig in a little deeper as we read deeper into Mr. Nagel's understanding of justice in the next volume. Till then.